An instructor attempts to humiliate a reserved female newcomer, unaware she holds the title of national jiu-jitsu champion. The consequences left everyone at the Austin training facility stunned. Often, the most formidable adversaries are those who speak sparingly. This woman's hidden identity was about to completely upend one conceited coach's reality. The evening sunlight filtered through the glass panels of Torres Martial Arts Academy in central Austin, creating elongated shadows on the emerald training mats. The recognizable sounds of bodies impacting the floor blended with exertion noises and the periodic sound of successful grappling moves. Marlo Sinclair positioned herself silently at the entrance, her brunette hair secured in an unpretentious ponytail, dressed in a basic grey shirt and black workout pants. Her appearance resembled any other novice who might have wandered in from the sidewalk, anxious, unsure, perhaps somewhat disoriented. "May I assist you, miss?" The inquiry came from Vivian Torres, the facility's proprietor, a seasoned woman in her 50s with compassionate eyes and rough hands that revealed decades of mat experience. "I'm interested in training," Marlo responded softly, her voice nearly drowned by the practice sounds. "I recently relocated from Oregon and heard positive reviews about this establishment." Vivian responded with a welcoming smile. "You've certainly found the right location. We offer novice sessions on Monday and Wednesday evenings, or if you're feeling confident, you can participate in our intermediate classes." Before Marlo could answer, a thunderous voice sliced through the gymnasium atmosphere like a blade. "Wait there, Viv. Let me examine what we have here." Coach Brennan Calloway stepped out from the rear office. His black workout shirt strained across his muscular torso, the American flag emblem on his sleeve reflected. In the light, at 42, Brennan had established his standing by being harsh, exacting, and completely merciless toward anyone unable to match his pace. He examined Marlo with the kind of inspection typically reserved for livestock evaluations. "Oregon, eh? Let me predict. You practiced some yoga, perhaps some kickboxing at your neighborhood fitness club, and now you believe you're prepared for authentic training." The other participants had started to observe the interaction. Jasper Mitchell, an experienced student with gentle eyes, paused his practice. Kennedy Brooks, among the few women who had persevered beyond the beginner level, glanced up from her stretching. Even Colton Ridge, Brennan's most loyal follower, ceased his activity to observe. "I have some training background," Marlo answered quietly, her hands folded behind her back in a stance that might have appeared submissive if one didn't observe how she maintained her weight distributed on her toes. Brennan chuckled, the sound containing sufficient sharpness to indicate this wouldn't be amicable. "Some training, correct? Well, darling, this isn't your standard McDojo. We practice authentic martial arts here, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, known as the gentle art, though nothing about our training methods is gentle." Vivian gave Brennan a cautionary glance, but he was already engaging in his preferred activity, establishing dominance. The man had never encountered a newcomer he couldn't intimidate, and he had no intention of changing that pattern now. "I'll tell you what," Brennan continued, circling Marlo like a predator detecting vulnerability. "Why don't you observe today? Determine if you have the fortitude for our methods. This isn't some feel-good participation trophy environment." The academy had quieted except for the air-conditioning hum and distant traffic sounds from Congress Avenue. Students who had been drilling moments earlier now stood in uncomfortable silence, observing the unfolding scene. Marlo's expression stayed neutral, but Jasper noticed something intriguing. She hadn't retreated a sin. Most individuals facing Brennan's intimidation either departed immediately or attempted to match his aggressive energy. This woman did neither. "I would rather participate," she stated simply. Brennan's eyebrows rose sharply. "Participate? Sweetheart, do you comprehend what you're requesting? These men have trained for years. Even Kennedy there could likely tie you in knots, and she's among our smaller students." Kennedy bristled at being used as an illustration, but she had learned that directly challenging Brennan typically worsened situations for everyone involved. "Listen," Brennan continued, his voice adopting that condescending tone he used for people he deemed inferior. "I'm not attempting to be cruel. I'm trying to spare you from humiliation and possibly an emergency room visit." Colton Ridge snickered from across the mat, earning an approving nod from his mentor. They had perfected this dynamic. Brennan would psychologically break down newcomers while Colton provided the mocking commentary. Marlo finally responded, her voice remaining quiet but containing an undertone that Jasper couldn't quite identify. "What if I sign a liability waiver?" The question caught Brennan off guard. Most people frightened away by his initial assault didn't return with practical solutions. They either departed or became defensive. This woman was problem-solving. "A waiver?" Brennan laughed, but with less confidence than before. "Lady, a waiver won't help when you're submitting to a white belt. Look, I've been practicing this for 15 years. I can identify natural talent from great distances, and I can spot someone who'll be a liability even faster." He gestured broadly at the assembled students. These individuals earned their positions through blood, sweat, and commitment. You want to enter and jump ahead because you watched some YouTube tutorials? The room's tension had shifted from uncomfortable to openly antagonistic. Brennan was hitting his stride, feeding off his audience's energy and his target's apparent submission. This was his comfort zone, in complete control with everyone watching him assert dominance. You know your problem? Brennan stepped closer to Marlowe, invading her personal space with the calculated precision bullies had refined over centuries. You don't know what you don't know. That's dangerous in this sport. Vivian finally intervened. Brennan, that's sufficient. If the lady wants to train, we can start her in the beginner's class. No, Brennan's voice cut through Vivian's diplomatic attempt. This is my training floor during sessions, Viv. You established that when you appointed me head instructor. I won't allow someone to get injured because we were too courteous to speak the truth. He turned back to Marlowe with renewed intensity. Let me describe the scenario, Oregon. You step onto these mats tonight and within 5 minutes you'll be gasping like a fish on dry land. Your yoga breathing techniques won't help when someone's pressing their full weight against your chest. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably. She recalled her first day, remembered exactly how it felt to be in Marlowe's position, but she also remembered that Vivian had encouraged her, not torn her down. Within 10 minutes, Brennan continued, warming to his theme, you'll realize everything you thought you knew about fighting was completely wrong. You'll submit so quickly it'll be dizzying. Jasper had heard enough. Coach, maybe we should let her attempt a light drill, see how she moves. Brennan whipped around to face his student, his eyes flashing with irritation. Jazz, I appreciate the suggestion, but I didn't request it. This isn't about being pleasant. This is about maintaining standards. The word standards hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone present understood what Brennan actually meant. He'd never been comfortable with women in the academy, always finding reasons why they couldn't keep up, couldn't handle the intensity, couldn't art like men could. Marlowe observed this exchange with the patience of someone who'd witnessed this scenario before. Her posture remained relaxed, her breathing steady, but something in her eyes suggested she was calculating. What would it require? She asked quietly. Brennan turned back confused. What would what require? For you to allow me to train. What would I need to do to prove I belong here? The question was so direct, so devoid of emotion or defensiveness, that it completely caught Brennan off guard. He'd expected tears, arguments, perhaps a dramatic exit. Instead, this woman was treating his intimidation like a business negotiation. You want to prove you belong here? Brennan's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. Fine. You survive 1 round with me, 5 minutes. If you can last 5 minutes without submitting, without crying, without fleeing, then perhaps we'll discuss letting you into the beginner's class. Colton laughed openly at this. 5 minutes, coach? That's harsh. Even I couldn't survive 5 minutes with you on my first day. But Marlowe nodded slowly, as if she'd been anticipating exactly this challenge. 5 minutes. No striking, just grappling. Standard jiu-jitsu rules? Standard rules, Brennan agreed, his smile predatory. And when you submit in the first 30 seconds, I don't want to hear complaints about how I was too aggressive or how this place isn't welcoming to newcomers. The academy had transformed into something resembling an ancient arena. News had spread quickly through the gym, and students who'd been working on individual exercises had gathered around the central mat. Even some people from the adjacent CrossFit section had wandered over to witness the commotion. Vivian appeared ready to intervene, but she'd learned over the years that sometimes Brennan had to learn his lessons through experience. Still, she positioned, hid herself near the mat, prepared to step in if things escalated dangerously. All right, Oregon, Brennan said, rotating his shoulders and cracking his neck in an elaborate warm-up display designed as much for intimidation as preparation. Final opportunity to spare yourself some embarrassment, no shame in acknowledging you're outmatched. Marlowe was already seated on the mat, quietly adjusting her shirt and retying her ponytail. She moved with an efficiency of motion that suggested someone comfortable in her own body, but to most observers she still appeared exactly as Brennan claimed, a yoga enthusiast who'd wandered into the wrong environment. Are you certain about this? Kennedy whispered as she knelt beside Marlowe. Brennan, he's genuinely skilled, and he doesn't restrain himself even with beginners. Marlowe looked up at Kennedy with a small smile. I appreciate the warning. What's your name? Kennedy. Most people call me Ken. Nice to meet you, Ken. I'm Marlowe. She stood and walked to the mat's center, where Brennan waited with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to escape. Jasper served as the unofficial referee, though everyone knew this wouldn't be an actual match. This would be a demonstration with Brennan as the instructor and Marlowe as the unwilling student. Standard position, Brennan announced to the crowd as much as to Marlowe. We'll start on our knees, work for position. First person to establish dominant control gets to work their technique. He dropped into a combat crouch, his years of training evident in his movement. Every muscle was coiled and ready, his hands positioned perfectly for grips, his weight distributed for maximum mobility. Marlowe assumed a similar position, but hers appeared different somehow. Where Brennan was all coiled aggression, she seemed almost relaxed, like she was settling into a comfortable chair rather too, and preparing for combat. You can submit any time, Brennan said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Just slap the mat 3 times or yell tap and I'll release you. No judgment. Well, maybe. Colton laughed at this, but the sound felt forced in the suddenly tense atmosphere. Ready? Jasper asked, looking between the two competitors. Brennan nodded, his focus entirely on Marlowe. This was his moment. 15 years of training, countless competitions, and an ego that demanded he prove his superiority to anyone who dared challenge it. Marlowe simply nodded once. Begin. For a heartbeat, nobody in the academy understood what they were witnessing. Brennan had launched his attack with guided missile precision, and somehow he was the one struggling to maintain his footing. Marlowe hadn't done anything flashy. There had been no dramatic throws, no obvious reversals. She'd simply moved like water flowing around a rock, redirecting Brennan's aggression while staying perfectly balanced. "What the hell?" Colton muttered, his confident smirk beginning to fade. Brennan recovered quickly. He was too experienced to let one moment of confusion completely derail him. He reset his position and advanced again, this time more cautiously, trying to establish the kind of methodical pressure that had served him well over the years. But again, something was off. Every time he thought he had a grip secured, Marlowe's position shifted just enough to neutralize his advantage. She wasn't fighting him so much as flowing around him. "She's skilled," Kennedy whispered to herself, but Jasper heard her. "Yeah," he replied quietly, "really skilled." On the mat, Brennan was beginning to realize that his usual strategy of overwhelming newcomers with superior technique and conditioning wasn't working. This woman wasn't panicking, wasn't making the desperate mistakes that usually made these demonstrations so easy. Worse, she was starting to create problems for him. Nothing dramatic. She wasn't attempting submissions or spectacular reversals. But every few seconds, Brennan found himself having to defend against something, a gentle pressure here, a subtle adjustment there, and suddenly he was the one working to maintain position. "Come on, coach," Colton called out, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. This wasn't how these situations usually unfolded. 2 minutes had passed, and Brennan was already working harder than anticipated. His breathing remained controlled, his technique still sharp, but there was growing frustration in his movements. Every time he tried to establish dominance, this quiet woman from Oregon found a way to neutralize it. 3 minutes. Brennan attempted to transition to side control, a position that should have given him complete dominance over someone of Marlowe's apparent skill level. But as he moved, he felt her hip come up at exactly the right angle, her arm frame perfectly positioned, and suddenly his transition was stalled. "How is she doing that?" someone in the crowd whispered. Vivian had stopped pretending to watch casually. She was studying Marlowe's movement with the eye of someone who'd been in the martial arts world for decades, and what she was seeing didn't match what Brennan had told her about this being a complete beginner. 4 minutes. Brennan was breathing harder now, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Not from exhaustion, he was in excellent shape, but from the sheer mental effort of trying to solve a puzzle that seemed to shift every time he thought he had the answer. Marlowe, meanwhile, looked exactly as calm as when they'd started. Her breathing was deep and controlled, her movements efficient and purposeful. She wasn't trying to dominate the exchange, but she wasn't being dominated either. 30 seconds, Jasper called out. The announcement hit Brennan like a slap. He'd been so focused on trying to establish control that he'd lost track of time. In 30 seconds, this woman would have survived his challenge, and everyone in the academy would have witnessed it. His pride demanded one final overwhelming assault. He gathered himself for a burst of pure aggression, the kind of desperate gamble that either ended fights or backfired spectacularly. But as he committed to his attack, Marlowe did something that changed everything. For the first time in 5 minutes, she stopped being defensive. It happened so quickly that most watching students missed the details, but the result was unmistakable. One moment Brennan was launching what should have been his finishing attack. The next, he was flat on his back with Marlowe in perfect mount position, her weight distributed so efficiently that his usual explosive power was completely neutralized. The academy fell silent except for the sound of Brennan's labored breathing. "Time," Jasper called out, his voice carrying a note of wonder. But Marlowe didn't immediately dismount. Instead, she looked down at Brennan with an expression that was equal parts calm and amused. "That was a good roll," she said quietly. "You have solid fundamentals." The comment was so casual, so free of triumph or malice, that it somehow made the reversal even more shocking. She wasn't gloating or celebrating. She was giving feedback like an instructor to a student. Brennan stared up at her, his world fundamentally altered. 5 minutes ago, he'd been the unquestioned alpha of this space. Now he was pinned by a woman who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten. "Who are you?" he whispered. Marlowe dismounted gracefully and offered him a hand up. "Marlowe Sinclair, but my friends call me Marlowe." Vivian stepped forward, her expression a mixture of amazement and recognition. "Sinclair? Wait, Marlowe Sinclair from Oregon?" Marlowe nodded, her cheeks coloring slightly at the recognition. "Holy," Vivian breathed. "You're the Marlowe Sinclair, 3-time national champion. You won ADCC trials 2 years running." The words hit the assembled crowd like a thunderclap. ADCC, the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, was the most prestigious grappling tournament in the world. Making the trials was an achievement that put someone in the absolute elite of the sport. Kennedy's mouth fell open. You're famous. Not really, Marlowe said, looking genuinely uncomfortable with the attention. I just compete sometimes. Jasper started laughing, not mockingly, but with pure delight at the absurdity of what they had all just witnessed. Sometimes? Lady, you're one of the best grapplers in the country. Brennan had finally made it to his feet, his face cycling through a spectrum of emotions: embarrassment, anger, confusion, and something that might have been respect. Why didn't you say anything? Marlowe shrugged. You didn't ask, you just assumed. The simple truth of that statement hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. Brennan had spent 15 minutes tearing down someone who could have probably submitted half the room without breaking a sweat. I moved here for a fresh start, Marlowe continued, somewhere I could just train without the pressure of reputation or expectations. I just wanted to find a good academy where I could work on my game. The silence that followed Marlowe's explanation was heavy with the weight of everyone's assumptions being systematically dismantled. Brennan stood in the center of the mat, looking like a man who'd just discovered that gravity worked in reverse. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice smaller than anyone had ever heard it. Why would someone like you want to train at a regular academy? You could be teaching seminars, running your own school. Marlowe sat down on the edge of the mat, suddenly looking very tired. Because sometimes being the best at something is the loneliest place in the world. When people know who you are, they either treat you like you're made of glass or like you're some kind of mystical creature. I just wanted to be a regular person who happens to love jiu-jitsu. Kennedy approached cautiously. So when he was saying all those things? I've heard worse, Marlowe said with a sad smile. You'd be amazed. Her need to test you when you're a woman in martial arts. Most of the time, it's easier to just find somewhere else to train. Vivian's face had gone through several shades of red during this exchange. Brennan, in my office, now. But Brennan was already moving toward Marlowe, his expression one of genuine remorse. I owe you an apology. A big one. I made assumptions about you that were completely out of line. You made assumptions about me because I'm a woman, Marlowe corrected gently. There's a difference. The distinction hit Brennan like a physical blow. She was right, and they both knew it. If a quiet man had walked into the academy claiming some training experience, Brennan might have been skeptical, but he wouldn't have been actively hostile. You're right, he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. I have some thinking to do about how I treat people in this place. Jasper stepped forward. For what it's worth, that was the most beautiful jiu-jitsu I've ever seen in person. You made it look like art. It is art, Marlowe replied. That's what people forget sometimes. Yes, it's martial arts, it's combat, it's competition. But at its heart, it's about human movement and problem-solving and respect. She stood up and looked around the assembled group. I hope I can still train here. I really do like the space, and most of you seem like good people. Vivian laughed, a sound of pure relief. Marlowe, I'd be honored to have you as part of our academy family, and I promise things are going to change around here. Colton, who had been conspicuously quiet since the reversal, finally spoke up. Could you maybe show us some of those transitions you were doing? I've never seen anything like that. Marlowe's face lit up with the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her all evening. What began as bullying transformed into one of the most valuable lessons that our Steen Academy ever learned. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most wisdom, and the most dangerous opponents are often those who speak the least,